Elon Musk, incidentally, because of Donald Trump's tariff policies and because of the cutting of government jobs and creating, just broadly speaking, a lot of insecurity, uncertainty in the business community. Elon Musk, and also because I guess people are starting to protest Tesla cars, he's lost billions of dollars. Billions of dollars in market value.
Tesla stock took a massive hit, specifically on Monday, where it was at its lowest point since 2020. And the reporting is that it lost more than 50% of its value, $800 billion in market cap. It was at its high in December when it was obvious that Donald Trump and Elon Musk were buddies, and he was probably going to get a bunch of more government contracts to subsidize him. But between the two SpaceX back-to-back explosions, the declining Tesla sales that was already happening, and then the acts of protest were in France. Tesla cars were set ablaze. In Boston, Tesla charging stations were set ablaze. There are other incidents throughout the country, including just picketing and making it so that people feel like they don't want to financially support this guy who is dismantling the administrative state to get rich.
There's a plastic surgeon in Worcester that has a gold Cybertruck that is in the press talking about, hey, let's be nice to everyone with different political beliefs.
Oh, God. Well, I mean...
Worcester's been just on a real awesome tear lately. I love it. Elon Musk down $148 billion. This according to Bloomberg News. Here he is on
with Larry Kudlow. And Larry Kudlow is like more of a traditional conservative who cares about just if stock market go up or stock market go down.
That's it.
And so you can, even though he served under Donald Trump, you can tell I think from this interview, he doesn't like Elon Musk and he doesn't like what's happening right now. And so just like look at, I don't know, the way that Kudlow reacts. Between lines.
But also remember, now Elon Musk has all the data from the HHS of all patients, essentially, in the health system. He has all the data from the Treasury Department. He is theoretically in charge of, like, I guess, keeping this data safe. Here he is out on a tour assuring people that, like, there was some really special circumstances as to why Twitter was all messed up yesterday and down and up and down and up. In fact, part of it is even down today, I think. Here he is out there explaining that it wasn't him. It was some, oh, I know who it is. It's obviously the people in the middle of fighting back against an invading force in their country. They must have the time to be messing with Twitter.
There was a cyber attack on X today, which shut it down and may have been foreign sourced. Yeah. It's a big story. You want to give us a moment on that?
Well, we're not sure exactly what happened, but there was a massive cyber attack to try to bring down the X system with IP addresses originating in the Ukraine area.
Oh, wow.
Ukraine area? Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Wait,
these guys. Evidence? Now, you know what's awesome, though, is that these high-tech, almost militarized hackers who took down the X system, as he calls it, they forgot to use their VPN.
I know, yeah. It is odd that they would leave that breadcrumb trail to a country that is very politically convenient right now.
At a time where they can't really be doing stuff like that.
Right, no, this is a perfect time to upset the Trump administration.
Yeah, right.
Try and get that deal signed
Make
again.
sure you leave big breadcrumbs so they know it was us.
Yeah. No evidence. He said massive DDoS attack. I don't know if Anonymous did it. We still don't really know, but like...
You know what else is in the Ukraine area?
Russia. Totally. But like, this is the guy that we want rifling around in the Treasury with access to our social security numbers, our bank information, our medical information, and that he's seemingly feeding into his AI platform because he's so behind, say, in China and DeepSeek, but even OpenAI, he's behind. So like he's combing through our personal information and putting it into his like database, which was I guess now it's an it's the X system because he's trying to turn it into a payment app akin to PayPal. So that's where he's grabbing this information from. And look how easily it was hacked into.
Oh my God! Did Kudlow follow up on that? Like, how isn't it strange for hackers to show their IP address? So
Yeah.
A massive cyber attack to try to bring down the X system with IP addresses originating in the Ukraine area.
oh.
Well, so that's your suspicion. Is the website, is the internet up? Is it up yet?
It's up, yeah.
It's up yet. Okay, good. But I just was looking back.
Okay, wow, you really dug into that, bud.
Although Kudlow does ask him a question, maybe this is a good opportunity to just play the next clip where he's basically asking him about like, hey, so your stock price took a massive hit, lost 50% of its value on Monday since its peak in December. You know, your rockets, he's not saying this, but your rockets are crashing, and you're doing all of this so that you can like feel like a king and steal everybody's personal information for your new like Venmo payment system on X, and just torching his reputation in the process. I mean, Elon Musk's favorables have just completely fallen off a cliff. And in this clip here, do you have it, Bradley?
You're seeing just the next
No,
question.
the part where he looks like he's gonna cry.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes.
He looks like he's going to cry when Kudlow asks him about like the state of his businesses here and how he's going to keep juggling all of this. And I imagine some members of the boards of his companies have the same questions as he's on ketamine and maybe some other things publicly all the time.
And that was only growing over time, which meant if we didn't do something about this, then there won't be any money for anything. We'll just be servicing debt.
And you know how to read an income statement, and you know how to read a balance sheet. You've had some business experience. I'm kidding, but
yeah,
you know about this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, really, I just don't want America to go bankrupt.
Pause
So
it.
it's a call to action.
Well, you know what? Maybe you should do, if you're really worried about this, why would you stop billions, in fact, trillions of dollars of revenue from coming in?
Yeah, well, you cut taxes.
I mean, when you start to like dig into what Tesla's business model has been, which is like not actually making money off of the cars they're selling, but making money off of the carbon offset credits that they get, you know,
That they sell to polluters.
Government program. Maybe it starts to make sense as to why he doesn't really realize that you need income coming in from in any way to fund your production. But continue on this.
Stuff.
Yeah, I mean, really, I just don't want America to go bankrupt.
So it's a call to action. You're hearing a call to action.
Yeah.
You're giving up your other stuff. I mean, how are you running your other businesses?
With great difficulty. Yeah, I mean,
But there's no turning back, you're saying.
I'm just here trying to make government more efficient, eliminate waste and fraud, and so far we're making good progress, actually. So our savings at this point exceed $4 billion a day. So it's pretty significant.
You think you'll wind up getting to $1 trillion?
You're a pretender.
Yeah.
Of savings?
I mean, unless we're stopped, we'll get to $1 trillion of savings.
And that.
You are a douchebag.
Yeah. Was it all worth it? Was it worth it? Like, you could have just been the richest guy on the planet, but not enough.
Oh, he'll still be.
Oh, he still will be, yeah. That's the thing. But it does hurt his ability if this continues, this protest movement about Tesla. If that continues to crash, and, like, there's some shady accounting. We don't need to get into it right now, but, like, there's a...
You have your intel services.
I mean, I should, yeah, I need to call out to Nassau County, but like green car stocks was, and everyone should check out Crystal Ball on TikTok. She's a great explainer about this, but there seems to be some smoke around the idea that 4 car dealerships in Canada sold 8,600 vehicles in just 3 days, which would mean that the 4 stores would have to average 2 vehicles per minute. And the reason that that's significant is that once they hit that quota, they became eligible at the last minute for $30 million worth of electric vehicle rebate grants from the government of Canada.
That's convenient.
How many times, and still needs to be more reporting on this, we will see in the coming days, but how many times has he done this? Maybe whoever bought those 8,600 vehicles certainly wasn't people coming in off the street and just saying, I'm going to buy a car right away in 30 seconds, and doing that over and over again across these 4 dealerships. How many times is he doing this? This is like the conservative book sales thing, where they want to get Bill O'Reilly to the top of the charts, and so they buy all his, killing books with the money that's at their disposal. What I would love to audit, talking about auditing, I'd love to audit Tesla. I'd love to audit SpaceX and see if there have been some decimals moved around or money that's unaccounted for. Because when he talked about how if Kamala Harris wins, he feels like he's going to be going to jail, what did he mean by that? He could have just been hysterical and having a really bad come down that day, or he could have something to hide.
Hey folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.
This aviation disaster is really seismic. And for those who don't know, last night, the Reagan National Airport outside of Washington, D.C., there was an American Airlines flight coming from Wichita, Kansas, and it collided with an Army Black Hawk helicopter over the Potomac River. The helicopter, it appears, was on a training flight. And as I said in the headlines, it's the deadliest aviation disaster in U.S. airspace since 9/11. In total, it's believed that there were 64 people on board the passenger jet and 3 on the Army helicopter. Some of the folks on this Kansas flight were figure skaters and their coaches and families returning from a training camp. Both U.S. citizens and also some Russian citizens as well. Now, we can't make a causal connection to any one factor at this moment. I want to be clear about that because the information is still coming out. But we do have 2 overarching themes about, at the very least, how the United States relates to aviation and transportation safety in this country. And one is a bit deeper. The first, that first reason really is that Reagan National Airport is overly congested. If we could pull up the Washington Post article here, they did a good job this morning of breaking some of this down. This congestion is a problem of really just slowly building up to putting more flights going through this airport. The Washington Post article explains here at the beginning. The airspace along the Potomac River where an Army helicopter and an airliner crashed Wednesday night poses some of the most complex challenges in the country for pilots, requiring them to rely on layers of procedures and electronic safeguards to avoid a catastrophe. If we could just scroll down to that first or second paragraph here. Military Coast Guard helicopters frequently fly low over the river, sharing the skies with planes on the heavily used takeoff and landing routes for Washington's Reagan National Airport. Congestion in the skies and on runways and taxiways around the airport has raised safety concerns for years. National was built to handle 15 million passengers annually. It now handles 25 million. And keep going because there's a little bit more I wanted to get to in terms of the context. Lawmakers proposed in 2023 to add more flights at National to serve new long-distance routes. Opponents of the idea raised questions about safety. Last year, as part of legislation to fund the FAA, Congress added 5 round-trip flights. The decision came over objections of members of the D.C. area congressional delegation who have long argued that the airport is at capacity. U.S. airlines have had a strong safety record in recent years, with the last mass casualty crash occurring in 2009. Federal aviation officials have scrambled to respond to a spate of near collisions at airports around the country that began in 2023. Industry leaders said they were a warning sign that there was a risk of a crash as air traffic bounced back from pandemic-era lows. The FAA has investigated at least 3 close calls at National in recent years. 2 occurred in quick succession last year, heightening concerns. In one, air traffic controllers instructed a Southwest jet to cross a runway while a JetBlue plane was starting its takeoff roll down the same runway. In the second incident, an American Airlines jet preparing for takeoff nearly collided with a King Air plane that was landing on a shorter runway nearby. The FAA was investigating both incidents. Now, this fight goes back to also it's the gradual increase of flights at this particular airport. Again, this is the airport that like our lawmakers fly through. So their incentives are both personal and then also related to wanting more flights to the areas that they represent. This article from Maryland Matters about this was really interesting. This is the bottom section, Matt. Yep. They go back to this FAA reauthorization fight in 2024 when these DC area lawmakers from Virginia and Maryland were fighting back. Opponents said Washington National, also called DCA, already strains to safely handle the current level of air traffic in and out of the airport. Adding flights will only worsen the safety environment, they said. But lawmakers from outside the DC area argued that additional flights would be a positive. Representative Hank Johnson, Democrat of Georgia, said they would add connectivity and economic expansion. It should be noted, by the way, that Georgia, Atlanta, huge aviation hub, one of the biggest airports in the country. So that's probably related here.
I mean, and that's the thing, is that connectivity and economic expansion. Yeah, we're a growing country, actually. There's a, I mean, I guess it's a Democrat saying that, so I can't even hit him on the small government thing. We need to be expanding the safety things of this first, and stop just expecting the benevolence of growth to cure all problems.
And like, you know, look, this is also, it's a Republican House at this time, so they lead the committees and they decide what's going to be added to the FAA authorization. So it's still tilted towards the Republicans, but yeah, that Democrat saying that is extremely depressing. Representative Burgess Owens, Republican of Utah, also applauded the extra flights. This legislation was designed not for one airport or one airline, but for all of us, he said. It gives more convenience, more opportunities to families traveling into Washington, D.C. The 5 new routes have not been selected, but some members, including Senator Ted Cruz, Republican of Texas, who is the ranking member on the Senate committee that oversees aviation. By the way, now that the Republicans took back the Senate, he is the leader, have speculated that San Antonio could be one beneficiary. And by the way, that's what happened.
Gives opportunities to families? No, you guys want more flights into where you work. Exactly.
And, you know, they're responding to industry and they're hearing, I think, from these airlines, this is how the sausage gets made. There was and then this article cites this analysis from Temple University's Fox School of Business, where they found that transportation committee chairs saw flights to their districts increase by more than 5% on average from 1990 to 2019. The analysis, which was published last year in the academic journal Organization Science, also showed that airlines increased direct service to Washington, D.C. From a chair's district. The numbers generally reverted to normal after the chair's term. So this is how this works. And that's the overall, like, systemic, bipartisan, frankly, problem that we're seeing here. But then we have the short-term story that's related directly to Donald Trump and Elon Musk. Now, so this is an article from The Verge pointing this out from this morning, that Elon Musk pushed out the head of the FAA ahead of Donald Trump taking office. Musk has publicly clashed with the FAA and its former chief, Michael Whitaker. Now, Whitaker stepped down just before Trump's inauguration in anticipation of being fired, and now the FAA doesn't have a permanent leader at this current moment because Elon Musk had tweeted something about him. Just scroll down a little bit here, Matt. Michael Whitaker stepped down as FAA administrator on January 20th, the day of Donald Trump's inauguration, after clashing with Elon Musk, whose company SpaceX is regulated by the agency. Musk publicly called on Whitaker to resign after the FAA fined SpaceX for failing to get approval for launch changes. And now the power vacuum at the agency is coming into sharp focus after an Army helicopter collided with an American Airlines jet Wednesday evening in Washington, D.C., killing everyone on board. So we have that.
And we should also note that after the election, but also before it, and just made less noise, planes had to be turned back because this guy was firing rockets off when they were re-entering the atmosphere. This guy is a threat to your safety in all of these places. And I mean, talked a lot about what he's doing in Texas, and sort of space. It's space pollution, literally. It's something that like Neil deGrasse Tyson was talking about back in like 2008 of like, we're putting up so much stuff in the skies and some of it just falls back down to Earth. This stuff is literally causing flights to turn around.
He wants to like have his like cosmic playhouse essentially, and not have a nagging bureaucracy that would say like, maybe you shouldn't put this amount of junk into space because it could fall and kill people, or the bureaucracy that might say like, no, we shouldn't have this many flights going into this busy of an airport that initially was only supposed to have 15 million flights a year and now nearly doubled at 25 million. So that was on Inauguration Day. Same day, Trump announced hiring freezes, which, by the way, included air traffic controllers and airplane workers. So then January 22nd, Democrats, Representative Steve Cohen and Larson put out this statement. This is number 2. Yeah. Ranking members Larson Cohen's statement on Trump's dangerous freeze of air traffic control hiring. That was 2 days later, January 22nd, 2025. And now, January 29th, the evening of, what do you know? What happened? There was an incredible disaster. We don't know for certain that that's exactly what happened, but we do have this from a reporter of Mother Jones, who said last night, was literally talking to the union representing federal air traffic controllers earlier today about how there's already a major shortage of air traffic controllers, and the resignation offers they just got from OPM could seriously endanger public safety. And last night we saw what happens when the government doesn't work. So again, it's too early to draw causal connections, I think. Although
but the elements are pretty clear.
The elements are pretty clear. And the original part of what I'm saying about the increase in these flights to this airport clearly, I think, is a major issue that's independent of the second piece of the Trump administration's influence on this. But even if you can't draw a causal connection to these hiring freezes and to what that Mother Jones reporter was saying, and to the dysfunction that Donald Trump has created, know that this is what their vision is for the future. With Project 2025 and vote and the dismantling of the administrative state, the people that make our travel safe, the people that make our food safe, the people that inspect the drugs that we're ingesting into our bodies, they want those folks all gone so that the billionaires don't have to deal with the cumbersome burden of having to actually provide people products and services that don't kill us all. And that is the goal of the Trump administration, to loot the administrative state and give free rein to those very industries that they already serve. So regardless of I also should say the other theory is that it was DEI. Duh.
It turns out you need to have priorities, and we're not going to be able to have just infinite growth without attending to safety and infrastructure that's going to allow that, and like infinite military sort of maneuvers flying around because we're all of a sudden reopening Guantanamo to start concentration camps. It turns out we can't do all of the above, and we don't like Pete Buttigieg here politically, and
No.
a big problem with him, but I'll just say fixing bread prices for a consulting agency applies a little bit more than being an MTV Christian like Sean Duffy now, who is the transportation secretary. These guys are jokers, and to hear them come say we're looking into it, like I what a joke this entire, and Elon Musk firing these people, what a joke this administration is.
I mean, they're already going to blame DEI. It doesn't matter. It won't even matter if the identity
They're gonna make
of
DEI popular.
they're repeating it over and over again, which the Democrats could learn from. I mean, God, with the level of repetition that that the Republicans engage in terms of messaging, they say the same thing over and over again, and how stupid it is, but it's still able to get across. Can you imagine if we had that same kind of discipline with the Democratic Party? But it's all a coalition of never Trumpers all the way up to the squad, and there's no consistency on anything. And they're still just like struggling to respond and meet this moment. And I'm hoping that the reaction, like, I think Trump overreached with that. I'm going to shut down the government that he did yesterday. And I'm not sure if you guys, I'm sure you talked about it quite a bit.
Yep.
But the fact that there isn't a blitz of Democratic Party spokespeople saying the exact same thing right now about Donald Trump endangering Head Start and SNAP, necessary things that feed and educate people in our society, and the turbulence that cause, it's a failure. And like, for all of our sakes, they have to get it together and figure out a way to actually attack this administration.
And one final point before we get to our first guest in the ads, but the people are already there. The people sense of urgency from and I'm just not just talking about like, far left people that are always sort of keyed up on this stuff. I'm talking about normie people too. They are desperate for any sort of sign that there's urgency and not the complacency that has, sentenced us to where we're at now.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out. Let's talk about yesterday's illegal thing. Now, I got to get more specific. Because there was multiple. The unprecedented firing of a National Labor Relations Board commission member, that's never happened without cause and without even claiming cause. Again, this shuts down the labor board. It needs a quorum to function. Same with the EEOC. People that Trump appointed to the EEOC. Like this time around, they really know they have planned for this. But let's talk about the Impoundment Control Act. We played a clip of Donald Trump in 2023, basically outlining what he was going to do. This came from Russell Vogt. It came from the Project for 2025. This is almost like foundational. There are two things, it seems to me. The Schedule F, get rid of all the civil servants. And the other is essentially defund whatever he wants to, despite congressional appropriation. Hopefully, I think by now, over the past 2 days, this audience knows that the 1974 Impoundment Control Act and the Train v. New York City cases, more or less around the same time, I think it was, both as a matter of the Supreme Court precedent established this and the statutory presence of it. And then, of course, just like an OLC memo in 1988, and also the Constitution, which says appropriation. We now know what that means. What is Trump banking? Is this just like we're going to make things very, very difficult for people as part of like getting, people to quit? Or do they think that the Supreme Court, have they teed this up? Like you watch cases, and for people who don't know, Ellie will look at like little threads that build over the course of a decade or 8 years or 5 years, somebody says the major questions doctrine 15 years ago, and people are just like, what the hell is that? And Ellie's got that on his bulletin board and waits for it to come up again, and then all of a sudden becomes the law of the land. What's your sense of how they're going to respond to this?
Right. So I want to do both of those stories at the same time, right? Because the firing of the commissioners, that is something that's been building within Supreme Court conservative doctrine for a very long time. It's called the unitary executive theory, and it's this idea that the executive branch is just one person, the President of the United States, in this case, Donald Trump, and he can do whatever he wants throughout the executive branch with basically no other outside control, no congressional control, whatever. He can do whatever he wants. Everybody in the executive branch serves at his pleasure is the thought behind the unitary executive theory. And so the Supreme Court has been pushing that for quite a while, and they will let him get away with firing the NLRB guy and firing the EEOC guy. I just believe that they shouldn't, but I think they will. This Impoundment Act crap, that's a little different. Not only are we, as you pointed out, in direct violation of statutes and Supreme Court precedent, we are in direct violation now of the constitutional appropriation power, right? Like that is clearly given to Congress. And when we talk about things like major questions doctrine and, the Chevron deference and all those other things, all the conservatives are saying it under the guise of Congress has this power, the executive doesn't, right? So for them to kind of turn around and say Congress has the power, the executive doesn't, to determine how to enforce the laws and blah, blah, blah. But the president has the power and Congress doesn't to spend the money appropriated by Congress. I'm not saying that the Supreme Court doesn't have the craven hypocrisy to do it. I'm saying that it would be such a left turn, right? It would be such
it would be so craven and hypocritical. It would probably be one of the most, because all of that Chevron doctrine is basically Congress doesn't have has the ultimate authority and cannot even, in some respects, delegate a broad mandate to the executive. They need to be very specific about it. And to say that on one hand, and to say that when Congress is specific about giving money, actually what they're saying is that's just the ceiling. You can go from zero to whatever they say in terms of funding it. That would be just absolutely right. There'd be no law left.
So if anything, I'm more worried about this case getting up to the Supreme Court and the conservatives using it to strengthen their bullcrap major questions doctrine, to strengthen their anti-Chevron deference doctrine, to actually strengthen their view that courts, not Congress or the president, controls everything in terms of the interpretation of law, right? So I don't think the court will go for him. And my bigger worry is that the court, in going against him in a decision that will be praised by liberals who just don't like Trump, that the court will insert really dangerous and ultimately unenforceable language into that opinion that then gives us problems 5, 10, 15 years down the road, while everybody celebrates it because in the immediate term, it's stopping Trump, right? So that's kind of my intellectual worry. But here's the other thing, Sam, and this is kind of what I was trying to say at the beginning of our segment. I can tell you that what Trump is doing with the funding is illegal, right? I can tell you that the Supreme Court is probably going to overturn it. Who's going to turn the money back on, right? You were talking about how federal workers might take a buyout because they don't know what Trump's going to do next. Do you know how many organizations and institutions are reliant on federal funding that has now been randomly cut off? There are schools, HBCUs, that if this stands up for more than a couple of weeks, will not be able to make payroll because their federal assistance has been cut off, to say nothing of the thousands, potentially millions of people who will not be able to put food on their table if federal assistance is cut off. We're kind of focused on the domestic stuff, but remember, this also applies internationally.
Yeah.
Trump has ended HIV protocols
and
globally. So people are literally going to get their HIV medicine today and don't have it because of this random crap that Trump did yesterday. So when you think about the full scope of what's been frozen, a Supreme Court order a month and a half from now saying, like, actually, that order was wrong, it still requires somebody to turn the money back on.
I've got some good news.
Go ahead.
Breaking 10 minutes ago. The White House Budget Office, according to Jeff Stein, has officially rescinded the order authorizing a federal freeze on grants. Now, I say this I say this with a certain amount of trepidation, because in 20 minutes we could read like, well, actually, not exactly, and so I have a feeling it's going to be one of those deals, but
it's good for Tennessee State to make payroll right now. But I actually went over on Blue Sky. I was talking about this yesterday. One of the actual problems here with sustaining a lawsuit against these actions is, as we just saw, they change every day. They change every minute, right? And so, like, how do you sue? How do you have, for all the, the stupid legal jargon terms, how do you establish standing? How do you establish rightness? How do you establish mootness when you're suing against a policy that is changing by the minute?
Right.
And because it's so generally vague, at any moment you can go to court and say, like, Trump can't do this, and then Trump can say, like, I never said I was going to do that, and you're like,
or we stop doing that and we're just doing something different, and then you got to go back and restart the whole process again.
Do not pass go, do not collect $200. You got to go all the way back to the start, right? So, like, that's also part of the chaos, and that's the entire point of all of this. It's succeeding in creating chaos. It's succeeding in creating an environment where people do not know what's going to happen tomorrow. And that means some of the stuff will fall through the cracks.
And, right? And frankly, it is all about making a hostile work environment for everybody associated with the federal, for America. I mean, really, like, from every entity that relies in some fashion on the federal government operating as it should, which is, really everybody. And, short of, like, there's some very wealthy people who operate outside of those things, and all the aspects of the federal government are largely encumbrances, except for their, the FAA, and so that they can fly into their private airports and whatnot. Let me just, the way that I deal with this is to,
drink.
Drink, as you know. We've spent a little time doing that in the past. But drink and then over-intellectualize as a way of separating myself from my emotions. So when you talk about, like, and again, this is hypothetical, but tomorrow they could just, actually, no, we rescind our rescission, and they just could do this like every day, every other day, Tuesdays and Thursdays we have cut funding. Monday, Wednesday, Friday we haven't. What when you worry about, like, what that decision that on its face would appear to stop Trump from doing something like this, but basically plants a seed or further cultivates some vine or growth essentially within the law as to debilitate the federal government down the line, what does that look like?
Well, it looks like a situation where the Democrats, should they ever get their heads out of their ass and be able to win another election, it creates a situation where the Democrats cannot undo by executive order all the stuff that Trump did do by executive order. You see, like, if Trump's spaghetti at the wall, feces at the wall, just like a monkey's just throwing stuff, right? And it's going to be incumbent, if he ever loses power, if the Democrats ever take power, to undo a bunch of the stuff that he did, right? But if the court says, because we stopped, policies A, C, and 18 from Trump, that means we can stop all policies from whoever, Gavin Newsom. You see,
it's a power grab, right, by the Supreme Court, because they're not necessarily
to preserve the parts of Trumpism they like, but get rid of the parts of Trumpism they don't like, and debilitate the ability of Democrats to go back in and undo it all. But again, even that kind of worry is incumbent upon the Democrats, being allowed to have a free and fair election again, which I'm not sure that we will. The Democrats being allowed to win a free and fair election again, which I'm not sure we'll be allowed to do. And then the Democrat who wins the free and fair election sometime in the future actually doing something and actually spending all of their time using their power maximally to undo the Trump crap. I am still, it's funny, we're talking about the firing of the NLRB guy and the EEOC guy. Maybe I'm fighting the last war, but like Joe Biden got in and we didn't fire anybody, right? We didn't fire Chris Wray. We didn't fire Louis DeJoy. Like we didn't fire anybody. But Trump is out here, firing people who didn't even do anything wrong just because they represent something that he doesn't like. He's firing people left and right. Whereas when the Democrats come in, it's all about turning the page and looking forward, not backward, and twirling. Like that's all we freaking do. Right. And so at some level, as much as I hate what I'm seeing with Trump, as much as I despise him and his entire, I hate him as a man, as a record label, and as an institution, like, this is what it looks like to use power maximally. And if Democrats ever have the opportunity to have power again, they better use it maximally.
Yep. And I guess it just, on that Supreme Court thing, the very sort of like ham-fisted version of this is just as we said Trump could not infringe upon the Empowerment and Control Act, we can't also, this court also decides that Medicare for all, that is not, you can't have that. Right. By the same hocus pocus.
Right. You can't have Medicare for all. You can't have, we basically have gotten rid of the Commerce Clause. And remember, you can't enforce the Civil Rights Act. Because it'll be if you can end DEI by executive order, but now if you're trying to push it back through by executive order, no, that violates the civil, that's unconstitutional because the 14th Amendment actually is there for white people first and foremost. Like they're almost
there's a myriad of ways of them basically forming that as a protective shield and making sure that this stuff never comes back.
Right. So it's just, I've already been warning Democrats, when the Supreme Court starts releasing these decisions, especially the ones that go against Trump, read them very carefully.
Because they're laying seeds for preventing any type of
even
reinstitution of this
Trump,
stuff.
Never forget that the court is not on your side.
Ellie?
Yeah, it's been 10 days.
I was going to say, I didn't think we would get to this point for another at least 65 days or so, but here we are. Hope springs eternal.
I mean, look, people spring eternal, right? Like, I keep coming back to this. White people voted for this. A majority of white people voted for this, and large minorities of Latinos, and other racial and ethnic groups voted for this. A third of people stayed home and didn't vote at all. And so now people are getting what they asked for, and I hope they don't like it. I hope they don't like it.
I worry that we don't really have a connection, that there hasn't been enough done by, Chuck Schumer gets up and says, you're defunding the police. I feel like that's a little bit insufficient for the moment. Maybe there's a reason why, if the leader of the Democratic Party, right? He's the leader of the Democratic Party right now. He's the most senior Democratic leader we have, is not explaining to people the relationship between government operating and things that impact them on a daily basis, except for the police.
Democrats really have to wean themselves off of wordplay as if that is good politics, right? They have to really get over themselves that turning them around on them doesn't freaking matter. Nobody cares that you're now using one of their lines against them. They care that Trump is using power and Democrats seem powerless to stop him. It's Chuck Schumer saying, now you're defunding the police.
What
it's
percentage?
Hakeem Jeffrey saying, but God is still on the throne. Really? Is he? I can't see him.
Right.
We've got to stop with these word games and start with actual resistance games, right? So one of the things that I keep saying, and we've seen this from a lawsuit from the Quakers, actually, with ICE going into churches, Quakers saying that is a violation of their First Amendment rights. I don't want Chuck Schumer standing on the Senate floor talking about, well, this thing with birthright citizenship, that's really bad. I want Chuck Schumer standing in the National Cathedral with 100 undocumented migrants behind him and saying, come get me. Come get me. Come arrest me, Trump, and we'll have our little court case. That's the kind of fight that I want to see from Senate Democrats and elected officials, not word games where we play gotcha with their own, turning their own words and phrases back on them.
It's just stunning to me. I wonder if that 1/3 that stayed home, the reason why was because they felt there wasn't enough police on the streets. I suspect that's not the case. But Elie Mystal, we will, assuming we're both here, in the next couple of months, we will check in with you again. Good luck. I imagine there's going to be a lot of gaming in your future, to cope.
A lot of gaming and a lot of reading really bad briefs designed by the Trump administration. I mean, as an aside for your listeners, trust me, one of the worst things about my life is that the next Solicitor General, the person who has to argue these cases in front of the administration, and so a person that I'll have to spend hours and hours listening to, is John Sauer, who not only was Trump's lawyer for the immunity case, not only is he a horrible FedSoc person, he's the guy that sounds like this. He's got that problem with his throat. And it's like, I listen to this man for hours talking like this about crap, and it's gonna drive me insane.
All right, good luck. Enjoy you, man. Hang in there. Appreciate it. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out. Here is Tim Kaine on the buyout. It's easy for me to tell federal workers, don't take the buyout because we need you. It's easy for me to say that because I'm not dealing with the insecurity of what happens if Trump fires me, or how miserable are they going to make it in this office. But just in terms of efficiency, again, I will repeat, you have about 2.1 million federal workers, which is, as a percentage of the working population, more or less where it's been, same percentage for decades upon decades. Probably 60 years. And efficiency is not trying to drive out any federal worker, regardless of what their status is, what their job is. That's not efficiency. In fact, that's the definition of something that's inefficient. It's completely unstrategic. Here is Tim Kaine basically telling folks to ignore Trump's offer. Incidentally, this comes from, this is the way that Elon Musk did it at Twitter.
And they received an email that said, from the administration, if you tender your resignation by next Friday, we will guarantee you payment through the end of September, whether or not you show up for work. So tender your resignation, and then, boy, it's just going to be a gravy train. You're just going to get paid for 7 months without working. The president has no authority to make that offer. There's no budget line item to pay people who are not showing up for work. This is a guy who made this promise to contractors again and again and again when he was a private business guy. Oh, come work for me on my casino. Come work for me in a hotel. We're going to do a handshake. We're going to do a contract. The contractor does the work and then finds out they get stiffed. So my message to federal employees who receive this is, yeah, the president has tried to terrorize you for about a week and then gives you a little sweetheart offer. If you resign in the next week, we're just going to pay you for doing nothing for the next 7 months. Don't be fooled. He's tricked hundreds of people with that offer. If you accept that offer and resign, he'll stiff you just like he stiffed the contractors. He doesn't have any authority to do this. Do not be fooled by this guy. You were here before he was here, and you'll be here after he was here. Show up for work, be diligent, serve Americans every day, make their life better, answer their phone call, give them an answer, track down their constituent call. Don't be fooled by a fake offer that because he's terrorized you in the last week, it would be easy to just resign now and get a check for 7 months, because I can tell you that promise is worth nothing.
Mortified Penguin on the IM. Hey, crew, Fed here. To my fellow Feds, do not fall for the scam. There is no budget for what they promise since we're still on a CR. It's nakedly obvious. There is no budget for this. And their rescission on the memo that said we're going to pause all federal grants and whatnot essentially means that for the time being, they understand that the Impoundment Control Act is still the law of the land. They don't have the ability to decide, oh, actually, we're going to underfund this and we're going to use it as some type of slush fund to pay out severance for federal workers. That's just not happening.
And that is Trump's pattern with regards to paying contractors, even contractors who are, say, illegal Polish migrants who are removing asbestos for Trump Tower in the 80s, is to exploit their labor and then threaten to stiff them. And, in that case, call information or border protection if they decide to get too pushy about it.
The Echo Machine, didn't Jeffries tweet that 3 days ago before Trump's order? Which order?
After the NIH one.
I don't care if he said it on day one. I mean, he's the head of a major political party. There's two of them. He is the head of the opposition party, at least in the Congress. And he's basically saying it doesn't matter who's the president because God's still on the throne. I mean, if anything, the fact that 3 days later this order goes out is evidence of how blinkered from a political standpoint that is. But if he believes that shit, it's even worse.
Yeah, tell Meals on Wheels that God's on the throne.
God. All right. We got 24 minutes to take phone calls. We'll probably just take a couple. Militant apathy. Sam, this Jeffries thing is a blind spot for you, bro. Listen.
What?
The idea that Hakeem Jeffries has to tweet that God sits on the throne because his name is Hakeem Jeffries. He can tweet that God sits on the throne. But to make an issue, to say presidents come and go is saying none of this matters. If he wants to get on Twitter and say, distinct from the fact that Donald Trump is there. If he wants to write, Donald Trump should understand we're all God's children, and what he's doing is hurting people. I got no problem with that. What I got a problem with is him saying that that it doesn't matter who's the president as long as God is on the throne. I'm sorry. If he can't serve as the leader of the Democrats in the House without saying that politics are irrelevant, then he's not qualified to sit there.
What's the blind spot that we need to pay lip service to God in politics?
Militant apathy. Dude, that's what people say when hopeless shit happens. I'm sorry. I get it. But if the leader of the opposition party says this is hopeless, then we're done here. Wrap it up. Wrap it all up. That's exactly what I'm saying he shouldn't say. I don't need to reach out to a black clergyman to get some context because he's not a black clergyman. I don't understand why this is so hard to understand that a political leader should be not saying it's hopeless. So let's just wait 4 years and hope that the best thing happens. I don't give a shit what the context of that is. Here's the other context. He's not in church. He's on Twitter. This breaking. I mean, this is the way it's going to work, folks. This is the way it's going to work. This is Caroline Levitt. She is the woman who lied yesterday about the tens of millions of dollars of condoms that the U.S. supposedly sent to Gaza. She wrote, "This is not a rescission of the federal funding freeze. It is simply a rescission of the OMB memo. Why? To end any confusion created by the court's injunction." The president's executive order on federal funding remain in full force and effect and will be rigorously implemented, but it's unclear who implements this if it's not the OMB. I mean, you understand, this is what I keep saying, is that like they are taking a sledgehammer, they're going in and they're doing demo. They don't care if they're taking out something structural or not. They don't care. All they're trying to do is destroy and demoralize the administrative state. And so they're going back and forth on this to confuse people, to make it harder to bring a court case against it. I mean, you can see it rippling through. I mean, just the conversation we've had in the past 2 hours is a microcosm of it. Is this legal? We have that conversation with Elie Mystal. And then midway through the conversation, the OMB rescinds its memo. And then in the wake of that, they rescind the rescission of the actual act. And we're going to have to figure out how to, deal with this stuff. Rescinding the memo, literally not the contents of it. Yes, Harlan Crow is Clarence Thomas, billionaire sugar daddy. How do we not remember the Nazi memorabilia story? I do remember it. I do. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out. These are some of the wealthiest people in the country, if not the world. And they were all standing right behind Donald Trump on inaugural day, or just about. Here is first Palantir CEO Peter Thiel, maybe the ringleader of the PayPal mafia, as it's called sometimes. This is just him in April of 2024. Just at a Mercatus Center event. Mercatus Center is the sort of libertarian think tank, or one of those. Here he is.
Sort of, one way to think of the Weimar period was, it's like the dwarves in Moria, where they dwelled too deep, and finally they awakened the nameless terror of the Balrog. But I think there are, and again, I don't think we're ever in a cyclical world, but there are certainly certain parallels in the U.S. in the 2020s to Germany in the 1920s, where liberalism is exhausted. One suspects that democracy, whatever that means, is exhausted, and we have to ask some questions very far outside the Overton window.
Okay, so there he is saying, like, we're like Weimar Germany, and democracy, whatever that means, has been exhausted. I want to get back, is that notion of, like, whatever democracy means, who could tell?
Nothing has meaning.
Is interesting. Now, for people who don't know any history after Weimar, we saw the rise of Nazism. And Overton window means, like, we got to widen the scope of what we contemplate as being normal. Here is Mark Andreessen, the guy who created Netscape, another tech billionaire. This is him on the Chris Williamson YouTube channel. this is where and you will recognize this, Gil, from this guy obviously reads some Curtis Yarvin or talks to him directly, but here he is.
Talking about this too, right? Which is like, okay, how do we actually like redo the system is of course much harder. The other lens on this that I think about a lot is Curtis Yarvin, who's also a good friend of mine, and the way he describes the American system that's running the people, the way he describes it is we are living under FDR's personal monarchy 80 years later without FDR. Right. And the reason he describes it, he says, look, when before FDR, the federal government was actually very small. Like the tax rates were like super low. The federal government didn't do very much. The FDR dramatically, by orders of magnitude increased the size and scope of the federal government. He did that for two reasons. One was the New Deal. And then the other was World War II. And so the federal government that Franklin Roosevelt left behind in 1945 when he passed away was the government that he had built, which he had run the entire time from 1933 to 1945 himself, in which he had staffed himself and he had overseen himself and everything. And he built this giant structure. And as Curtis basically says, as long as you had FDR running that, it could run really well. And, we won World War II and saved the free world and it worked and pulled the U.S. out of depression. Like the whole thing worked and it was great. But if you let an organization of that size and scope run without its founder CEO for 80 years, you end up with what we have now, which is just like basically an out of control bureaucracy, like an out of control system.
All right. So I just wanted to lay that out. And there was also one where Andreessen, I think, was on Joe Rogan, basically saying that, FDR, Hitler, whatever, people were really in control of stuff. All right. So with that said, he cites Curtis Yarvin. Who is Curtis Yarvin?
Curtis Yarvin is a software programmer from San Francisco who in the early 2000s started writing a weird blog under the name Mencius Moldbug. And in that blog, he outlined a lot of these ideas for getting rid of democracy in favor of a corporate monarch or dictator and running territories instead of by government, by corporation. For example, his idea for San Francisco was something called Frisk Corp, which would be a corporate-run San Francisco where you need a special card to swipe it and swipe out. At every moment in Frisk Corp, you're under constant and total surveillance. They know every single thing you're doing, even if you're in your house. And this is what guarantees the safety of the populace. Of course, he's only reinvented the totalitarian government of Orwell's 1984. But one thing you find with these guys is they think all the villains of science fiction and speculative fiction are the heroes, and they seek to emulate them. So I often hear from people that this is Snow Crash, this is Parable of the Sower, etc. They're all right. And that's the basic idea here. You get a lot of gobbledygook from guys who think they're really smart, but are actually saying really dumb and dangerous things, and now are sadly very close. They're in control of the federal government in Washington. And that's what's kind of shocking about it. When I started this work last year, I felt like a lot of people, even people I know in a long time, viewed it as sort of a conspiracy theory. And, if Kamala had won, I would look like a guy who had way overreacted to a few weirdos in tech. Even billionaires were criticizing me, saying, nobody takes these guys seriously. This is just a journalist trying to be in the New York Times someday. And I wish that had all been true, because what's happening now is even scarier and worse than I thought. And so Yarvin's idea is that Americans have to get over their dictator phobia, he said. And the way that we do that is by installing a CEO to be like the shadow president and to destroy American government from within through something he calls RAGE, R-A-G-E, retire all government employees. And that's very much what you see happening right now through DOGE, Doge, destruction of government by Elon, in Washington as we speak.
And he lifted it.
I mean, honestly, I think it is, you were just ahead of the curve here. Here is New York Times' David Marchese interviewing Curtis Yarvin. And this is the longest interview I've seen with him. And it's about an hour long. And there's sort of two segments. And I was struck by how exactly what you're saying. It's a lot of gobbledygook. And this guy's not that bright. It's fascinating. He's asked, why do you think FDR was a dictator or a CEO or a king, whatever? They sort of, they play around with these terms as more or less the same type of thing. And he doesn't seem to really have an answer except for a strange anecdote. But let's just listen to this for a minute or two. This is Curtis Yarvin being interviewed at the New York Times. This came out about 3 weeks ago, I guess.
Know Mark Andreessen, and so I sent this piece to Mark Andreessen, and it's an excerpt from the diary of Harold Ickes, who's FDR's Secretary of the Interior. And it's a little diary entry describing a cabinet meeting in 1933. And what happens in this cabinet meeting is that Francis Perkins, who's the Secretary of Labor, comes in to this meeting and is like, here, I have a list of the projects that we're going to do. FDR personally takes this list, looks at the projects in New York, and it's like, this is crap, aren't you doing? Like, humiliates Francis Perkins in the Oval Office or wherever they're having their cabinet meeting. And then at the end of the thing, it's like everybody agrees that the bill will be fixed and then passed through Congress. This is just a picture of FDR acting like a CEO. And so, the question of, was FDR a dictator? What does it mean to be a dictator? What does this pejorative word mean? I don't know. What I know is that Americans of all stripes, Democrats, Republicans, and everyone, except for a few right-wing Republicans, basically revere FDR. And FDR ran the New Deal like a startup.
Okay. Okay. I don't know. I honestly
like a startup.
I'm waiting. Like, what made FDR a dictator in your mind? And he was rude to Frances Perkins the first time she came in, and everybody liked FDR. He ran it like a startup.
Well, she was a DEI hire.
What's going on here? Like, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time, sort of diagnosing Curtis Yarvin. Although I did note that it seems like every reactionary wears a leather coat on some level. Like, it's their way of saying, I want to take us back to the 14th century, but I'm wearing a leather coat, so this has got to be all new and rebellious. But what? There doesn't seem to be a there.
Yeah, well, these are people who are used to talking in rooms where nobody challenges them. So your stupidity gets accepted and you get more competent in it. The other way to look at it is this is a disinformation for dumb people who don't know anything about what he's talking about. And so his cherry-picked anecdotes are used to convince all of these young wannabes in Silicon Valley that, oh, wow, it was a dictatorship, et cetera. There's one quote Yarvin has from a few years back where he says you can go into a bar and say, I think the British should have won the American Revolution. And people will say, yeah, that's cool. Well, try that shit in Boston or somewhere where actually people know about some of these things and see what happens in a bar. So this is a guy who's sort of making up this universe from cherry-picked anecdotes and trying to prove this point. I mean, if I worked in government, I come from government. I spent a lot of my career there. I worked for Governor Jerry Brown. I worked for Senator Dianne Feinstein when she was chair of the Intelligence Committee. I come from mainstream Democratic politics. I'm not on the far left. And everything in politics is a negotiation. Everything is a test of egos and wills. That's designed that way from the Greeks and the Romans. There's a long history of how this works. There are checks and balances. If Roosevelt had been a dictator, then why did we go and elect a bunch of Republicans who hated his whole project in intervening decades? I mean, it makes no sense, but it's not supposed to. We're not the audience for it. The audience is people who don't know history, who don't know what to think, and might fall prey and victim to this revisionist vision that is only designed to convince them that we're already in a dictatorship. It's just a matter of which dictator you want.
That's what Andreessen was basically saying. We've been living under a dictatorship without the dictator here, and that's why things are going awry on some level 90 years later. I mean, it's insane stuff, and I want to get to the plan. We got a lot of questions about that as well. But just one more thing that strikes me. Because you have delved into his writing, and from what I've read and heard from him speak, the fascinating thing is he is trying, when he responded later in that interview to like democracy, he defined it, where you heard Pete O'Teal say, whatever that means. He defined it as, a desire for the common good, which is not what democracy is. Democracy is not about, I think everybody wants that, but democracy is about the participation in the decision making, as opposed to a desire for what the ends is. And I want you to talk about how slippery they are about what democracy is. And because there seems to be, with this sort of cohort of conservative thought, the way they strip this, the way they lay this bare is it's all sort of like focused on some type of outcome. And they try and, I guess, flatten the differences.
Erase meaning.
Erase the meaning of everything prior to that on some level.
Yeah.
I would add also, he used an example, and I'm sure you've heard him say this, about if, why would we want, Apple's run by a CEO? Could California, the government agency of making computers, make an Apple computer? Of course not. But that's a very, very narrow sort of like I guess, job assignment for government. It's not just we're going to make good computers. There's a whole host of addressing a bunch of different concerns, which is fundamentally about democracy. Will you just talk about that element of it?
Yeah, these guys only view reality through their own lens of tech and wealth and power. Having been in government, you have to view it through the eyes of vast constituencies of people, many of whom have different needs or maybe at cross purposes. Politics is a tough art to master. A lot of good people fail at it. And so when they talk about things like democracy, et cetera, a lot of their problems could be cured by a poli-sci 101 class. The common good through history has come to be defined as something that the public must participate in defining. What they're trying to say is that, well, there were times where there were monarchs or there were dictators, and the common good was defined as whatever they decided it was. And, they claim things worked better or whatever under those systems, which I think history will prove that they don't. So all of this is pointed toward complete ignorance of actual history, of political theory, of how we got to the system that we have, toward a return to something that doesn't work, always gets overthrown, usually through violent revolution or war, and that would only benefit the richest guys in the room, which is them. So I think, if anybody who's familiar with the basics of political science can see the very juvenile and sophomoric mistakes they're making. But again, these are guys who don't get challenged in the rooms that they're in. And even when they get interviewed by, say, the New York Times, it's a pretty softball interview. This is a guy who's called for a dictatorship and laid out a plan that appears to be being followed. And he gets this glow up, black and white, smoldering photograph of the New York Times. I mean, this is a really bizarre time to be living in. You couldn't get these guys to cover this stuff before 3 days before the inauguration, they dropped the Yarvin interview. And believe me, I was talking to people and urging them to do this. And again, I was out there in weirdo land, and now we're all in weirdo land. So
yes,
but they covered Project 2025, right? I mean, and that I guess is like
let's, before we get to Project 2025, will you just lay out the plan for us? Because then I think it overlays over Project 2025.
Yeah.
Oh, you're talking about the plan in the blueprint that Yarvin had? Well, in 2022, Yarvin updated his plan to a second Trump administration, and it's called the Butterfly Revolution. He did this on his Substack, and he said that the basic plan would be, and he said, this is all imaginary scenario, a harmless thought exercise, but the idea would be to install a CEO-style dictator while keeping Trump as the figurehead, to then purge career government employees, basically carry out rage, retire all government employees, to weaken these institutions, get rid of any people who are loyal to democracy, replace them with loyal ninjas who would answer to the CEO dictator, not to the democratic process or to Congress or anybody like that. Then start centralizing executive power under the executive branch, rebutting the courts, refusing to go along with the laws, just challenging every aspect of the system to break it. And then, and also bypassing congressional oversight, and then use this new centralized power to start seizing the other centers of power in society, media power, academia, establish complete control over the information sphere, because in order to have this experiment last, you have to make sure it controls information, because it needs to control future elections. It does no good if in 2 years we get the Congress back, or in 4 years we get the White House back. So that was the scary vision he laid out in 2022. And as far as I can tell,
that sounds impossible.
Yeah, everything that Musk is doing, again, it could all be a vast coincidence. I'm a skeptical person myself. I'm a journalist. I come from mainstream politics, but it seems to me that they're doing everything on their list so far. And I've come to a point where I'm not going to underestimate these guys anymore. I am going to underestimate all of the people whose job it is to be telling people what's going on. I think if most of the American people knew what was happening right now, they would be very much against it. But no one is saying it.
That it's systemic. I mean, that's the thing, is that I think there's this sense out there that like stuff is happening willy-nilly, but this is part of a plan. But
no, I mean, that was my question, and it's really just, it's fascinating to see how this pairs with the lack of meaning that they're trying to engender, and the fact that these tech bros have control over our communications platforms. They're able to make that a reality. I mean, everybody's a blue check, and what information is true and what is not. I mean, I think I saw Yarvin saying that this is the prime opportunity for our plan to come into place or go into place, because right now we're in a very irony-pilled or a high irony time, essentially saying that there's such little education that our ideas sound okay. I mean, it's the same with the anti-vax stuff. That's where we're at right now.
Definitely. Everything is considered negotiable, and there's no opposition that's organizing to really counter what these guys are doing. Instead, the Democratic Party's stance seems to be that, well, we're just going to let them do it, as much bad stuff as possible, and everybody will be against it. We're starting to see some people stand up and resist it. We've got people like AOC and others. Jamie Raskin said the other day that they're trying to install a tech monarchy. People are creeping toward it. But I think what people need to understand is that this is not random chaos. This is a strategy, and it's a strategy they've been talking about and writing about and bragging about for years. And once you understand that, then it takes on a different meaning. You can make more sense of what's happening. And basically, we've got an unelected, foreign-born billionaire up in our government, destroying it and defying our laws. This is exactly the kind of nightmare our Constitution was designed to prevent. And we need to be very aware of that, because we can stop it, but not if we stay asleep for too long. If these guys are trying to do as much damage as they can, as quickly as possible, because that's their key to keeping power. And I don't mean keeping power for 4 years. I mean keeping power in general. And to see the Democratic Party largely silent, to see the major media outlets not really getting it, is pretty scary. That to me is the scariest thing of all. People should, this is an advanced conversation. Catch up, get your pants on, get your boots on, and get out the door. It's time to go. And I don't really see that happening from the party that, again, I worked for very mainstream politicians for most of my career.
hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out. There's also like another a bomb, essentially, and it is winding its way through the Senate. This reconciliation bill, and you have a piece out just, I think, yesterday about what it's just going to do to not just to Medicaid. And never, I don't even know if you touch on Medicare in there because of the sequestration that could potentially follow from it.
There are actually a couple things with Medicare, but yeah.
The entire sort of like medical system that's going to be like, I don't know if there's ever been a single bill that I remember, at least in the 20 years that I've been doing this, that has such dramatic implications for daily life for so many millions of Americans in a negative way.
It's going to affect every American at some level. And as you've talked about, the fact that we're in this news vortex going on right now, where we have immigration stuff and protests and this Iran situation with Israel, it's not getting a lot of attention.
No.
And it's hard to get traction on it. We're doing a daily or almost daily newsletter called Trump's Beautiful Disaster, because the bill's called the Big Beautiful Bill. So we went back to the 90s with a 311 reference, Beautiful Disaster, a song by a band there. But anyway, we're covering it because of this impact, but it's been hard to break through. And I don't think people realize the extent to which this will have such a massive amount of disruption, particularly in the health system. So right now, the situation is that a number of rural hospitals in particular are struggling to survive. There is a report that says 1/3 of all rural hospitals, and that's about 700 hospitals across the country, are at risk of closure right now. And if you take $1 trillion out of the healthcare system, which is kind of what this will do, mainly by cutting Medicaid, that's the primary thing, and moving 11 million people off the Medicaid rolls, you're going to get a situation where suddenly the budgets of these rural hospitals will just go into the toilet. I mean, Medicaid is often the biggest line item in these budgets. You're talking about a program that has 73 million people
for revenue
right now. For revenue. And, I mean, some hospitals complain about low reimbursement rates in Medicaid, but there are programs that boost that are also being attacked in this bill. There's this program where the federal government will kick in extra money so that doctors will accept Medicaid and hospitals will accept Medicaid. And that was cut in the Senate bill.
That is the provider tax, right?
It's not quite the provider tax. It's a different thing called state-directed payments. But those have been attacked in the Senate bill.
Don't those provider taxes pay for those state-directed payments?
No, the state-directed payments come from the federal government. The provider tax is a separate thing that is a way for states to get more resources in Medicaid. And what happens is the state taxes a hospital. Let's say the state taxes a hospital $100. But what they say is also we'll reimburse you more through our Medicaid program by $100. So that hospital is held harmless. They're paying a tax, but they're getting the money back. But when you increase those rates and the state pays $100, Medicaid is a federal state program. So the federal government is kicking in some of that money. So by doing this circulation, it's a way to get the federal government to pay a little bit more.
Right. Okay.
And the state direct payments are supplements on top of that. So there's two things going on here, right? And both of those are being cut by the Senate bill in particular. There are other cuts in the House bill.
Ends up being more egregious than
worse.
the House bill, which is sort of shocking.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And so what does this mean? There are hundreds of rural hospitals that are likely to have to close because of what happens in this bill. And what does it mean when a hospital closes? There are sick people in the hospital that have to be moved. And if you're talking about a rural hospital, it's probably have to be moved an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours away. And that could be life-threatening in and of itself. The second part, if you have a rural town, and they lose their hospital, it's an anchor for the community. These are often the biggest employers in that community. You could obliterate an entire town by losing their rural hospital. And then 3, for patients, now the nearest hospital to where I live is 3 hours away. If you have a heart attack, if you have an emergency situation, you might not be able to get to the hospital in time. If you have a loved one that has to stay in a hospital somewhere else, you might have to pay to go to a hotel so you can see your loved one and help them through a time when they're sick. There are real burdens for patients. And then think about the burden on the remaining hospitals. So all of a sudden, they're getting patients from a larger area.
But wait a second. If you cut Medicaid, doesn't that mean that those 11 million people they get healthy and never have to go to the hospital, right? Isn't that the theory?
Actually, what happens is those 11 million people no longer have coverage, but if they're sick, they're still going to go to the hospital. And we have a law in this country that says if you are in an emergency and you go to the emergency room, that
you have to get
treated. And that is called uncompensated care. So if that person can't afford it because, they were poor enough to be on Medicaid and they don't have health insurance, they're going to basically go and get treatment without getting paid. And that's a burden on the hospitals.
And
budget.
then it ends up being a cost that is picked up by private insurance and by essentially the public dole.
More by the hospitals, right? Because the hospitals are the one giving the treatment and not getting paid
but
for it.
But they passed that.
Well, they asked for higher payments, but they might not be able to wrangle higher payments out of the insurance companies. And the other part of this is that more people are going to be coming in, whether they're insured or uninsured. They're going to be coming into that hospital. Hospitals are already understaffed. They already need more physicians. They already need more nurses. If you had a week wait time to see a doctor before, maybe it's 2 weeks now. And the healthcare system is very interdependent. If you have something go down in one side of it, the other side's going to be affected.
COVID. I mean, we saw how supplies had to be moved within the hospital system. If you have shut down a bunch of public hospitals, like Andrew Cuomo happened to have in the run up before COVID, there are hospitals that get overrun in terms of the burden and in cost and whatnot. And so this is going to have, and we should say that as little attention as it has gotten relative to the implications of this, look at the polling on this. Let's play this clip from Harry Enton on, is that his name, Harry Enton?
Yeah.
On CNN. He's never seen polling on legislation look worse, but it's
a soft intensity though, right? Because people don't really know about it.
People don't know about it. Is clip number, we have this. Yeah. Yep. And of course, there's other elements of this bill, and but this is like sort of where the biggest chunk of money in terms of cuts are coming from.
That's right.
Where is support for this mega bill?
You know, I'm really surprised when I look at polling data. I look at it every day. But the amount of disapproval for this bill, holy cow, my goodness gracious. And, you know, you mentioned the KFF poll. We're talking about 29 points underwater on the net favorable rating. But that matches the Quinnipiac University poll from last week when it was 26 points underwater. Oh, my God, you need Greg Louganis to get that far underwater. And, I mean, we're talking about a negative 41 net favorability rating among independents in the center of the electorate. You rarely ever see pieces of legislation or proposed pieces of legislation as unpopular as this. But here you see it in two polls, 26 points underwater and 29 points underwater. No good.
Extra, read all about it, mister.
I know.
It's 26 points underwater.
I mean,
did this guy fight in World War II?
I don't know. He's one of the doughboys. But, I mean, this is pretty stunning, but also does not seem to have, I mean, what are the prospects? Well, let's first talk about the bird bath stuff, because there's a lot of stuff in this bill that came from the House that goes into Senate. It's a reconciliation process, which means they only need 50+1 to pass it. It is not subject to a filibuster. However, there's a set of rules named after Robert Byrd, a now long deceased former Democratic and former Dixiecratic
senator from West Virginia.
Tell people about those Byrd rules and the process in which it goes through what they call the Byrd bath.
So this is a budget reconciliation bill, right? So in order to qualify for that special status where it can be passed by 50 votes, everything has to have a primary budgetary purpose. And it's not just that it has to have a budgetary purpose, because if you cut $10 here, then that has a budgetary purpose. That has to be the primary reason why it's in the bill. It cannot be a policy that is sort of masquerading as a budget item. And because, you know, once this rule was established, senators got more clever about trying to reach their policy goals through budgetary means. Right. And so the Senate sort of arbiter, the parliamentarian, the famed parliamentarian, is the one who decides, nope, that actually you're trying to do policy there, and that doesn't qualify under the 50 vote standard. So we're going to kick that part out of the bill.
And the parties, the two different parties, basically go to the parliamentarian, file almost like what would be functionally like briefs.
They should put these on television. The Democrats, in this case, the Democrats, say, I raise a point of order about this part of the bill. and I say that this actually has a policy purpose and not a budgetary purpose. And then there's a debate between the Democratic staff and the Republican staff with the parliamentarian present, and then the parliamentarian eventually makes a ruling. And that ruling is that this either gets to stay in the bill or this has to go. And we actually got last night some early answers on some of this stuff. With three of the, every committee in the Senate has a different part of the bill. Three committees that have lesser parts of the bill, they got rulings. And the biggest thing is yet another kind of survival from a near-death experience for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So in the bill, the way that the CFPB is structured is that they get their money from the Federal Reserve. They don't get their money from the budget. So the question is, well, how do we ding the CFPB if it's not budgetary? They're not on the budget. So what they did was they said, okay, we're going to put a cap on how much money the Fed can give the CFPB. And that cap will be the 0% of the Fed's available resources. In other words, we're going to zero out the budget of the CFPB. Well, the Democrats challenged this and said, you're just trying to kill the CFPB. You're not trying to save money for the budget because it doesn't save money for the budget, not directly. And the parliamentarian agreed with the Democrats and they kicked that part out of the bill. So the CFPB will still get its current complement. There is actually a cap on CFPB resources, and it's like 8% of what the Fed has. I forget the exact number. It's like $600 billion or something. I'm sorry, $600 million. But anyway, so that's out of the bill. And to be clear, Congress can pass whatever it wants to. It's just about having the special rules
that allow you to avoid the filibuster.
That's right.
And there are a couple. There are tens of these provisions at least.
Right.
Within the.
So this, CFPB is an example. There was another
artificial intelligence ban. There's a whole array of.
There's another one that got thrown out last night, which was the Republicans tried to repeal the CAFE standards for cars, which is an emissions standard, tailpipe emissions for cars, and say, cars have to have an average miles per gallon of 35 by X year. They tried to repeal that and say that would save money. And the parliamentarian said, no, you're trying to create policy, and that we're throwing.
Side note, the parliamentarian was sidestepped essentially when they essentially used the Congressional Review Act in a sort of a misappropriated way. But let's not confuse
this is
things.
a key point, right? Because this is the first time things have been kicked out of the bill. And John Thune, who's the Senate Majority Leader, has said, we're going to abide by the parliamentarian. However, as you just said, they sidestepped the parliamentarian in one previous
3 weeks
case,
ago.
just a few weeks ago.
On
and
a
they
separate bill.
They also did it for this bill. When they were doing the budget resolution, and now we're going to get into real wonky
This is
stuff.
getting into very wonky stuff, but this is very important because we're talking about the baseline, right?
Right.
Of how we approach the tax cuts that are set to expire.
Right.
And before we get to that, let's explain this other dynamic that exists with the Byrd rule, which is it needs to be deficit neutral 10 years out from the bill. Right.
Basically, it cannot create deficits after the 10-year budget window. Everything has to pencil out after that first 10 years. You can have it spend money or be a deficit in those first 10 years, but after that, it has to be neutral.
Which is why very often what we get is tax cuts that will expire in 10 years.
Which is what happened in the Trump tax cuts of 2017. The Trump tax cuts of 2017 actually expire at the end of this year.
Yep.
And that was to make it look cheaper and also to pencil out the budget neutrality outside the budget window.
And but when we talk about baseline,
right,
even though these tax cuts must expire,
right, so there's
by
a current
virtue of their very existence, they
explain.
could not exist if they weren't to expire at the end of this year. However, there's some.
Yeah. So the way it goes is there are two baselines you could use. There's a current law baseline and the current policy baseline. The current law baseline is, what does the law say? And the law says that these tax cuts expire in 2025. And therefore, if you extend them, it will cost the amount of the tax cuts in 2026 and 27 and 28 and 29 and so on. If you use the current policy baseline, the current policy is these tax cuts are in place. So if they just stay in place, that doesn't cost any money because it's just the same budget baseline as we have this year. And this is a really key point because of the rules of not just the rules of budget reconciliation, but also what it looks like to the public. Does it look like these things cost $3 trillion, or does it look like it's the difference between that and the bill looking like it saves money over the next 10 years, right? So the Senate is really, really interested in doing a current policy baseline.
The Republican Senate.
The Republican Senate. And the Democrats have said, well, that violates any standard because you could just pass a reconciliation bill saying Medicare for all, but we're only doing it for 1 year. And then the next year pass a reconciliation bill that says Medicare for all permanently, and that doesn't cost any money because it's current policy.
Right.
So is that really what you want to go for, Republicans? When Senate Republicans came up against this on the budget resolution, which kind of sets the terms for the reconciliation bill, they said, well, we don't need to ask the parliamentarian about that. And they just ignored the parliamentarian, didn't even ask her.
And they left it up to Lindsey Graham, who is the...
left it up to the budget chair, who is Lindsey Graham. And he said, yeah, sure, we'll do current policy baseline. Now we're in a position with the bill itself where Democrats are going to challenge that. And they're going to have the same debate in front of the parliamentarian this time. And I think some of these other things like CFPB or CAFE rules, Senate Republicans will probably not pick a fight over that. But if the parliamentarian says that the current policy baseline is out,
that's the biggest fight.
That's the biggest fight. And there may be a situation where they ignore the ruling of the chair, which they have the ability to do. And then
But Thune promised they wouldn't do it.
Thune promised, but we're going to see the rubber hit the road once
that's the big one. I mean, because like the AI regulations could drop out. We already have people in the House. We already have a couple people in the House who already say, I regret voting for the bill with that.
Big tech is lobbying furiously for that because it would ban all state regulations of artificial intelligence for the next 10 years. And that includes a whole host of products because AI is
in everything now, supposedly.
Not only that, but it's defined very broadly in the bill. So it could be, RealPage uses an algorithm to make its recommendations on how landlords can jack up rents. That could be considered AI, and so states and cities cannot do regulations on RealPage. It has a huge set of implications.
And so those smaller things, they may drop out. We're gonna start seeing this, and this stuff is so Byzantine that, outside of like a couple of small podcasts, frankly, people are not aware of this. The big one being though that what is the baseline? What are we going to determine the cuts? And the argument that I saw Stephen Miller make, I think it was on. So on Bannon, no, it was on with Kudlow, if you could believe it, there's no reason to expect that taxes are going to be any different tomorrow than they were today, which of course is like, what are you talking about? This entire bill, this tax regime was different than it was the day before you passed it.
If you extend this out, you just extend this logic out. There was a billboard on Fox News that said that this bill saved $8 trillion. And the way they got that is they said current policy baseline, that's $0. But also look at all the economic growth that this is going to spur if you extend the tax cut.
Well, that's the Laffer
which
curve.
Costs $0.
Right.
They said, oh, that's $3 trillion. That's going to, so that saves the government or adds revenue of $3 trillion to the government. And then they said, but also look at all the money we're collecting from tariffs, which isn't in the bill at all. But they said that's another $3 trillion. And so they put this thing together, and it literally said that this bill saves $8 trillion.
I don't understand why they even bother to why not just put out a number and just, instead of like trying to have to reverse engineer where you're getting these figures for. I mean, they're literally just numbers floating in the air, and they just shove them in there, and they're meaningless. It feels like we don't have a media, broadly speaking, that has the ability to push back on these sort of completely fake narratives that exist. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.